All right, we're going to do completing the square today. So it's another method of solving. Like quadratic formula is a method of solving for a quadratic x squared. Completing the square is another method. So first, in order to complete the square, you do have to understand what a perfect square trinomial is. And a perfect square trinomial is a trinomial that factors to be like this. So a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, this will factor to be a plus b squared. And then the difference of perfect squares, the a squared, this one factors to be a minus b squared. So how you can tell if you have a perfect square trinomial is looking at the first. These are perfect squares and this is perfect square. So 9 and 4 are both perfect squares. And then the square root of 9 is 3 and the square root of 4 is 2. So in the middle, you have 3 times 2 is 6 and you have 2 6 to make 12. So it is a perfect square trinomial. Basically, you multiply the ends and then double it, and if that's in the middle, you have a perfect square. So this should factor to 3x plus 2 times 3x plus 2, or 3x plus 2 squared. And you could multiply that out to see how that works too. So difference of squares is the same thing except for it has a negative, a minus in the second term. So x squared is a perfect square and 16 is a perfect square. X squared is x times x, 16 is 4 times 4. If you were to take 4 times x and double it, you would get the 8x. So it is a perfect square trinomial, except for that it's minus. So the difference is going to be, it's going to factor to x minus 4 times x minus 4, which can be written as x minus 4 squared. So we're going to use this idea to manipulate. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to want to know, or like get this x, our quadratic equation to be a perfect square trinomial. So then we can solve it using square roots like we learned in the solve by square roots section. So ways to solve quadratic equations, factoring, we're going to do that next, inverse operations, quadratic formula, and then we also have complete the square. So the whole idea is to get it to look like a perfect square trinomial. So what you do to figure out if you have x squared plus 6x plus something, you want it to be a perfect square, you take the middle one and you cut it in half and then you square it. So you kind of go backwards from here because it's 2 times that value. So you take half of it and then square it. So 3 squared would be 9. Then that would factor to x plus 3 and x plus 3, which you can then write as x plus 3 squared, because now you have a perfect square. So this one would be a perfect square. Well, if you think of it, if it's x minus 4 squared, then negative 4 times negative 4 is 16 would make this the perfect square. Or take half of negative 8, which is negative 4, and square it and you get 16. That's what goes there. So that's called completing the square. It's writing the trinomial so that it factors to be a perfect square, so you can write it like this. You take half of the middle term and you square it. So let's just practice that one more time. Half of 12 is 6, 6 squared would be 36. Half of 14 is 7, 7 squared would be 49. Half of negative 10 is 5, negative 5 squared is 25. So then these would factor then to, this one would be x plus 6 squared, this one would be x plus 7 squared, and this one would be x minus 5 squared. So perfect squares. So here's the steps to completing the perfect square, or completing the square. First of all, your a value, your leading coefficient in front of the x squared has to be 1. So if you have another number in front of x squared, you have to divide each term in the trinomial by a to get a equal 1. Then you move the c term to the other side. So the constant value, whatever that is, you move that to the other side. Then we take b and divide it by 2 and square it, kind of like we did up here, and we add that value to both sides of the equation because we want to keep the equation balanced. Then we factor, we write it as a perfect square, and then you square it to solve. All right, so here we go. First, is a equal to 1? Yes. So then the next step would be to move c, which is our 16. So I'm going to add 16 to both sides here. So we're going to get x squared minus 6x, and then I'm going to leave a plus blank here, and then 16 plus blank. Because our next step is that we need to add the b divided by 2 squared to both sides. This is the completing the square step. This is going to make the left side a perfect square so that it will factor nicely to a perfect square. So you take half of your middle term, negative 6 divided by 2, and then you square it. So that's negative 3 squared is 9. Now, in order to keep the equation balanced so that we're not changing the value of the equation, you do need to add that 9 to the other side as well. Then you factor it. This is difference of perfect squares. It's a minus, so it'll be x minus, and then the square root of 9 is 3. So it's x minus 3 squared. And then that is equal to 16 plus 9 is 25. And now you can finish solving it with square roots. So square root both sides, and you get x minus 3, that's positive and not negative 5, the square root of 25. Add 3, we're going to get x equals. 3 plus 5 is 8, 5, 6, 7, 8, yeah, and 3 minus 5 is negative 2. So you have two answers here, x equals 8 and negative 2. Okay, so a equals 1, check. Move c to the other side. I always add plus blank. You don't necessarily have to, but leave room for it. Because your next step then is to take half of your b term, so 4 divided by 2, and square it. 4 divided by 2 is 2 squared is 4. Add that to the other side. Since you're squaring it, it will always be plus on both sides. You'll always be adding something there. So you should never have a negative number in those blanks because you're taking the square. Then you factor this side. It should always factor. It's a perfect square trinomial now. It's x plus, since the original equation is plus here, and then the square root of 4 is 2. So that's what it factors to. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 plus 2 is 4. Then 6 plus 4 is 10. Then finish solving by square rooting both sides, and we get x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 10. 5 and 2, so we can't break that down. Finish it off by subtracting 2 from both sides, so it's going to be x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 10. All right, step 1, a has to be equal to 1. In this one, a is equal to negative 4, so I have to divide everything by negative 4 before I can start. So I'm going to get x squared minus x minus 2 divided by 4, that's going to be a half, equals 0. Then move c to the other side, so add a half to both sides. And I'm going to get x squared minus x plus blank equals 1/2 plus blank. Okay, then take b. So b right now is negative 1. So negative 1 and divided by 2. So negative 1/2 and then square it. That means that that's negative 1/2 times negative 1/2, which is going to be positive 1/4. So that's what you're adding to both sides, positive 1/4. Then factor it. It's going to be x minus something squared because this is negative, and x times x is x squared, so x minus. And then the square root of 1/4 is 1/2. So it'll be x minus 1/2 equals, then 1/2 plus 1/4. You'll need a common denominator. 1/2 is the same thing as 2/4 plus 1/4 is 3/4. Then square root both sides. When you square root a fraction, you square root the top and the bottom separately. So we get x minus 1/2 equals, this will be plus and minus, the square root of 3 is irrational, so I leave it as a square root of 3, over 2, the square root of 4. Last step is to add a half to both sides, and x equals, it'll be 1/2 plus or minus the square root of 3 over 2 will be the final answer. That example is quite complex, especially because we have the fractions in there. So if you didn't follow that, I suggest pausing the video. Now that you got it all written down, go back and watch it one more time. I'm going to do one more. If you think you got it, all right, go ahead. Give it a try on the student problems. You want to see one more? Stick around here. This one, you have to rearrange a little bit. You want the 10x to be on this side, and you want the 20 to be on this side. So first, and maybe you want a to be equal to 1. I guess you could divide by 5 to start with if you want, because you got to divide everything by 5 anyway. So we get x squared plus 4 equals 2x. Then I'm going to have to subtract 2x because I want that to be on this side. And then it's plus 4, so I'm going to have to subtract 4 over here to get the 4 on the other side. So that might have been too many steps at once, but it's going to be x squared minus 2x, and then I'm going to have negative 4 over on the right. My next step is to add b divided by 2 squared to both sides, so I'm going to put my plus blanks. Then b is negative 2, so divided by 2 squared. So I'm adding b divided by 2 squared to both sides. That's negative 1 squared is positive 1 to both sides. Then factor it. It'll be x minus, since it's x minus here, squared. And the square root of 1 is 1, so it'll be x minus 1 squared. And then negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3. Take the square root of both sides. We're going to get x minus 1 equals, the square root of negative 3 will be plus or minus I square roots of 3. Last step will be to add 1 to both sides, and I'm going to get x equals 1 plus or minus I square roots of 3. All right, let me know if you have questions, if you need help. I have another video on this on my YouTube channel. You can try searching it, or there's a lot of people out there that have done videos on completing the square. So if you need more examples, search for